What's up, everybody? This is the Roots and Branches video YouTube thing, and we are here to continue to kind of reach out within our community and go deeper on some topics. And we have a special guest today. So, yes, without further ado, there's a lot going on in the area and idea around immigration happening in our nation, and we have a person to talk about that. So, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. My name is Johanna Torres, and I work as an immigration attorney in the Bay Area, and I do mostly removal defense. What does that mean? I work in the San Francisco Immigration Court, and I help people who are facing deportation proceedings. Most of them are applying for asylum, and all of my clients are from Mexico, Brazil, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
It's pretty cool.
Very.
I'm sure not boring work. How did you get into that type of law? Is it something you always wanted to do, or is it something you kind of you saw a need and you wanted to engage with that? Yeah, if you don't mind sharing.
So I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and when I was in undergrad, I was working at a shelter for battered women, and we got this Mexican woman who was married to a Puerto Rican, and Puerto Ricans are US citizens, and he was kind of like dangling her legal status over her head to be abusive towards her. And at the time, the director of the shelter just told us, she's in deportation proceedings at any time, like ICE could come and deport her. And I just felt this panic and this fear for her, and also because I didn't know how to manage that situation. And we were able to team up with a nonprofit who told us, well, actually, because she's married to a US citizen and because she's a victim of domestic violence, she could get a green card through that. And I helped her translate her story from Spanish to English.
Oh.
And in that process, I was like 21 at the time, and in that process I was like, this is my calling, this is what I need to do with my life.
That's amazing. And then it just kind of led to the next thing. And how do you end up in the Bay Area?
I think my objective has always been to get closer to the border. So I don't think I'm at San Diego yet, but maybe at some point
Sure.
I'll go closer.
It's amazing. Yeah, we're really fortunate. There's so many incredible people at Oak Life who are doing God's work, and so I'm really grateful you were able to and willing to share kind of what you're doing and some of the experiences you've had, because as Greg said, the issues around immigration and how we enforce it are really important as people of faith. I mean, at the center of our faith is somebody who experienced being displaced and was an asylum seeker, and Jesus, right? And the early story of him and his family having to flee to Egypt. And so how we love and care for our refugee-seeking neighbors, brothers and sisters, is deeply central to our faith. So, yeah, you were recently at the border. Could you give a little context to like how we got here, and if you're watching the news and you're just seeing stories of detention centers and the talk around the wall, it's not something that just happened like this last year. It just kind of has some context. So how did we get here, and what's kind of going on at this moment?
Yeah, so to answer the context question first, before of like why I went to the border, the U.S. is a state party to a convention of the United Nations where it establishes that the U.S. will offer asylum to people who show up at the border and say, I'm afraid of being persecuted in my country. And that was originally done in response to World War II. So the convention was created because we don't want an entire population to be exterminated again. And we wanted a lot of countries in the world to be part of that agreement. And later on, it was amended so that it wasn't restrictive to only people fleeing from persecution as a result of World War II. So fast forward 2019, there's a lot of gang problems in Central America. There's a lot of problems with drug traffickers, mostly drug traffickers who are trying to bring drugs into the US because I guess Americans really like drugs. So you've got all this gang violence and all this drug trafficking violence, and people are fleeing to the US to ask for help. So this is how we got here, 2019. Last year, the administration imposed this metering system. So instead of being able to show up at the border and say, can you let me into your country because I need asylum or I want to go through the process of requesting asylum, now you have to sign up on a list. And the US doesn't want to take responsibility for that list. Mexico doesn't want to take responsibility for that list. So they gave that list to asylum seekers. They're the ones that manage this list. So when I went down to the border in July, I had heard stories about this list. I didn't really believe it until I saw it every morning at 7:30 a.m. at the border, where you have to put your name down on a list and they give you a number, and it takes about 3 months for them to call your number so you can go into the US and start fighting your case. But even within this illegal metering list system, there's corruption. So they're supposed to call 10 numbers a day, and each number represents 10 people. And when we went in the morning to hear how many numbers they were calling, sometimes they would call 3 numbers. So that's 30 people. And we were all like, well, what happened to the other 7 numbers? What happened to the other 70 people? And then there was rumors that you could buy a number for $1,000, $1,000 US. But if you do the math, like, it would take you about 250 days working in Mexico to make $1,000 because of the exchange rate. Like, the daily minimum wage in Mexico is $5 US. So how do you come up with $1,000 so that you can request asylum when there's a convention that says you can just show up at the border and request asylum? You don't have to pay.
Crazy. Yeah. It sounds the corruption, and I can't imagine like being those people like fleeing violence, trying to find somewhere where there's safety, and then getting stuck there, and probably not having the resources to do whatever they need to do to get by, and be in this limbo stage. Do you know how many people are in kind of that in between or seeking asylum? Do you know the stats on that?
Yeah, I do. As of July, it was 19,000 people who are just stuck in Mexico waiting for the US to call their number so they can start the pre-screening process of requesting asylum. So it's not even like we're going to let you come in and give you asylum. It's a pre-screening process. And that's where the detention centers come in, or the concentration camps, because you come into the US, you're not allowed to live in the US freely. You're put into a detention center while you fight for asylum. So that was really heartbreaking to me to see families when their numbers were called and they felt super excited that they were going into the US. A lot of them had not talked to the attorneys beforehand. And I'm thinking to myself, you have no idea where you're going. Like, you are going to a concentration camp. You're going to a detention center. When we were able to speak with some of these people beforehand, a couple of words of advice that we had to give them that was really horrible and hard to tell them was, if you're with a child, write your name and your date of birth with a Sharpie on their arm in case you get separated, because that's something that this administration has also done, separate kids from their parents. Also, wear the thickest layer of clothing closest to your skin, because they keep these detention centers really cold, so, and they won't give you extra clothes.
Is that intentional? Is that like
It's intentional.
make it uncomfortable for them? So
Make it as uncomfortable as possible. And also, you know, be prepared that there's going to be very unsanitary conditions. You might not be fed a lot of food. I mean, I guess a lot of them are so excited to be in the U.S. that they don't really understand the extent of how dehumanizing these conditions are. And as I said, we weren't able to speak to all of them, so a lot of them didn't know this strategy of, write your name on your child's arm.
Right. Yeah. It's a horrific experience to have to think through that. And yeah. And most of these folks, the 19,000, they're from Central America. Is that like generally is there like are most of them from Central America, South America, Mexico? Is it?
So I thought that there was going to be a lot of Spanish speakers, and actually, I don't know statistics for this, but at least what I saw, half of them were from African countries. So there was discrimination from Hispanics towards people from African countries. For example, when they were going to write their name on this list, they would say, like, that's not a valid birth certificate. Like, you need to get another birth certificate. So this person has already spent 2 months traveling to Mexico, and now they have to somehow get a birth certificate from a country that they are afraid of returning to before they can put their name on a list to wait 3 months for them to be called into a pre-screening process. So, I mean, I think logically, like, I would never do this. I would never go through this hardship to go to another country, but I've also not lived in their hardship to know what would push them to go to these limits.
Yeah. So as a person of faith, encountering this stuff, and how does your work and what you're seeing there, what's happening now, intersect with your faith? And is there an intersection? How do they overlap? And can you talk about that if you're willing?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it briefly about how, Joseph and Mary were fleeing Egypt, and how they had to basically request asylum in another country. And a lot of scholars of the Bible, they talk about how neighbor and stranger could be interchanged. So, the golden rule in the Bible about love your neighbor as you love thyself. So love the stranger as you love thyself. It's not even, be tolerant of the stranger. It's be welcoming and offer them help, offer them food. I don't know where we draw the line, and I know that a lot of people have that issue with immigration. They're like, well, we have all these people coming, we don't have the resources. A lot of them are like on government welfare programs. I don't know where you draw the line and say, this is the amount of people that we can help, or this is the amount of resources that we could give one person. But what I do know is that assuming the opposite position of saying we're not going to let anybody in, we're not going to offer anybody help, to me does not reflect Christian values.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I especially, this is me on a little bit of political high horse maybe, but if you look at where we spend our money as a country, you drop a couple percentages of our GDP in the military or the government budget in military, and that overseas bases and all those things, and you could do a ton of good.
So much.
So how about on a more personal level, where did you sense or not sense God in the midst of it? What did it feel like being there and thinking about God? And did it feel, were you angry at God? Did you see God in the people you're working with? And that wasn't kind of a planned question, but
I'm formulating an answer as you speak.
I'm trying to stretch out the question so there's space for how was it spiritually, emotionally, like in your spirit while you were there?
So going as an immigration attorney, going to the border is like a rite of passage, because a lot of immigration attorneys have already gone and they'll talk about it. So if you haven't gone, it's kind of like, you don't get to be in the club because you haven't done it. So when attorneys started going to the border, I felt that I wasn't ready to go. I didn't feel like I emotionally was going to be able to be useful there because my heart is so in it. I don't know how I got ready, and actually when I went, I don't think I was ready yet, but I was ready to be ready. So I forced myself to go because I said I can't keep postponing this. And when I was there, I think I did feel really angry. I felt very hopeless because of, you know, how both governments are not dealing with the situation. But I think I did see God in other volunteers and in other people that care about this, that care about social justice. I went with an organization that has an office down there, and they try to get people to go to their office before their number is called. And I saw their passion in helping asylum seekers, and I felt like, okay, not all is lost. There's people that care about this.
That's cool. Yeah, what's the, I saw it in the Mr. Rogers movie, but I'm sure it's a quote from like, maybe somebody else. It's escaping me at source, but in the midst of craziness and chaos, where is God? And the response is, look for the helpers. That's where God is. That's cool.
Was there a bit of additional inspiration or useful information that you got based on the trip that you were able to like bring back and start implementing in your workflow or anything along those lines?
I think that I saw a lot of people have the same questions, and I thought that it was difficult to speak individually with each person, so I started creating videos to educate people and attempting to respond to those questions, although they're easy questions, they're difficult responses. So a bit of a silver lining is that I went to the San Diego Immigration Court on my last day down there, and I met this family of 6. It was mom, dad, and 4 young kids. And the little girl, every time that the ICE officer came into the courtroom, she would start crying. I was tearing up. I'm pretty sure the judge was also tearing up because it's a really difficult position for all of us to be in. And I approached the man afterwards, and I gave him my business card, and I said, find me on Facebook, and I will help you for you to represent yourself in your case, because I can't do it. And so I created a video called 5 Questions That You Should Know How to Answer for Your Asylum Case. Or did I say that? Yeah, 5 questions. He found me on Facebook. I told him, watch my video, and I want you to write at least 3 pages, single-spaced, of why you're afraid to go back to your country. And he did that. He took photos of it. He sent it to me, and then we talked on the phone for 30 minutes, and I said, okay, this is what's important about your case. This is what you want to highlight. And he went to his court hearing, and he passed the pre-screening test. So the judge allowed him to fight his case from inside the U.S. And to me, that was a huge win. That just with the educational materials that I was putting on my Facebook page, that he was able to present his claim in a way that was favorable to his entire family.
Wow.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's intense.
Okay, maybe last question for this. I feel like there's so much more.
Of course.
So many ways we could keep asking questions and talking, but for the sake of time and all that. And you're not going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. You could get closer to the border. But
No, yeah, I'm not
it'll be around.
relocating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do, awesome. I wasn't trying to keep you here, but for folks who are maybe not going to be traveling to the border, or are in a career that holds them here, they're doing family stuff, but they see what's happening, they're watching the news, how can they engage in some way that's helpful? What can people do?
So I actually asked my friends these questions, like, if you didn't speak Spanish and you saw an immigrant on the street, how could you help them? Or let's say that you see an immigrant on the street and they speak a language that you don't speak. How do you think you could help them? And my friend told me, I was at BART, the train station, one day, and I could see the Spanish speaker who, I guess her ticket got stuck, and she was all frazzled. She didn't know what to do. And so my friend was telling her, walk over here to the station. You have to speak with the station manager. And since she had witnessed what happened, she told the station manager, like, her ticket is stuck. Can you help her? And then I guess the immigrant, like, couldn't believe that she would take the time to help her. And that's just, like, one really small, random act of kindness that you can do. So if you see somebody who doesn't speak the language or who doesn't understand the system, they're struggling, you could tell them, like, hey, this blue box is for mail. Like, you can put an envelope in here and it'll reach its destination. Like, for a lot of immigrants, even the mail is amazing to them. And if you think about it, like, I can put this paper in a blue box and it's gonna go all the way to New York. How does that happen? Yeah. Yeah. So that's one way in which you can engage with immigrants. Obviously, donating as well. Another way too, I think.
Can you pause there? Where would people want to? Where's a good place to donate? Are there? Should people just do a Google search, or other organizations you know of that are worth donating to?
So the organization that I went to the border with is called Al Otro Lado, which means the other side. There's also Border Angels. They also help people who are seeking asylum. There's also CAIR Coalition, CAIR. They helped detained immigrants. Yeah, I can send you a list of organizations that I think are doing really great work.
Sweet. That'd be dope. We'll add them to the comment section of the video so people can check it out.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're on to...
Another thing I was going to suggest is also to change the way we speak about them. So even immigrants will refer to themselves as illegal. They'll say, oh, I'm illegal, and I'll correct them and say, no one is illegal. Like, you just are undocumented. But we're getting you there. But even the UN Convention talks about refugees as the stateless. So I think that's a very much kinder approach to refer to them, as opposed to saying illegals, as opposed to saying aliens. It separates them and it demonizes them as if, they were gonna come here on July 4th and stay with all humanity.
Jeez.
That's good.
Back, kind of circling back, I know you said one more question, kind of last question. Individuals that may happen to work with undocumented individuals. I know back in my nonprofit days, I used to work with children who are undocumented, or their parents were undocumented. I needed to get resources, but it was harder because of blah, blah, blah. Are you familiar with other resources for individuals outside of just kind of the one-on-one compassion stuff? Is there places that people can go to get more information on how to help asylum seekers or undocumented individuals?
Like if they know somebody in there,
Exactly. Like in their community, it's more of a personal, there's a relationship there, and they're just an average citizen that doesn't have all the superpowers you have as far as information. Is there a place that they can go to get some of that information?
Well, I think we have somebody at church that works at 1951 Coffee, right? I know that organization. It helps refugees and asylum seekers to find job placement, and it trains them making coffee, which you know that the Bay Area loves their coffee.
Yes, we do.
It's a good one. That's a great plug, because on Wednesdays for the month of September is Karma Wednesday at the Parkway, which is where we do church. So if you want to go see a movie, you pay what you want, and then the proceeds go to 1951 Coffee. So let's go see movies.
Go see movies. This episode is brought to you in part by our sponsor, 1951 Coffee.
Which you just told me that 1951 is based on the UN Convention.
Thing, which you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah.
Crazy. Look
Comes
at all this full circle. Speaking of full circle, was there anything else?
No. Do you do you mind sharing? Do you have a website for your legal practice that you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. It's jtorreslegal.com, but actually I'm more active on Facebook and Instagram, so you can just find Abogada Johanna Torres.
Cool.
We'll keep that in the comment section for you because I can't spell that. But yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for just being
Thanks for
awesome.
having me,
You know, not only is she being a superhero with the immigration stuff, she's also on the coffee team. So if you're an Oak Life member, you had coffee. It's probably because she's awesome. So thank you again.
Yep.
Anything else?
That's
We
it.
out. All right, Oak Life. It's been real. Love you. Peace out. Nope, didn't work. Oh, okay. I'll edit that part out.